Welcome to this video series for skilled nursing facilities. We will be discussing the MDS, which is the minimum data set that is required for submission to CMS on a regular basis for every resident. If you need more information than this short video can provide, please go to the www.cms.gov website for the most recent RAI manual. There are many reasons to file a transfer or a discharge assessment in MDS. Today, we will be discussing what happens when you expect to see the resident return to your facility. In other words, in your clinical judgment, the return is anticipated. But first remember, there are at least a few reasons not to file an MDS assessment just because a resident leaves your facility. One example is the potential resident who came to your door and tried to admit, but did not stay long enough to have an entry tracking assessment. In other words, the person was not there over midnight. Another example might be a resident that is taken to the hospital as an emergency, but does not stay in the hospital for 24 hours. They might be there over midnight, but it was for observation only. This person does not need an MDS transfer, but you must also be sure not to charge Medicare for the midnight they did not stay with you. Another common reason not to file a discharge is if an established resident is on a leave of absence, an LOA, according to the definition used in your facility. Allowable LOA length is a matter of facility policy and not something specified by MDS. Again, midnights away from the facility mean that that specific date is not chargeable to Medicare Part A, so your ARD might shift. But most discharges are for medical reasons, emergent or pre-planned, and either kind can be with return anticipated or with return not anticipated. So let's think of it like a grid. Today's video will concentrate on the squares on the left-hand side. The situation in the lower left might be a family member that comes to take the resident home for a week or two to take their own assessment of the patient's needs. This is like a very long LOA, but again, there is no discharge to another facility, and you expect in your clinical judgment that they will return. Another reason to go ahead and file a discharge even on an LOA would be because the resident missed 3 days of therapy and you must file an end of therapy anyway. The implications of a discharge in this square are a 310F equals 11, discharge with return anticipated, a 0310G equals 1, planned, and A2100 equals 01 to the community. If the resident is still using Medicare Part A days, then A310H equals 1, yes, it is a SNF Part A discharge, and A2400C equals the applicable date. In that case, Section GG will apply. A more common situation lives in the square on the top left. This is a return to the hospital for a planned procedure follow-up from their original surgery. For example, this might be taking pins out of a fracture. You know that your resident is admitted to the hospital for a night or two, but will return to your facility afterwards. This is similar to the previous LOA situation, except the discharge is to an inpatient facility. So A310F equals 11, discharge with return anticipated. A310G equals 1, planned. But in this case, A2100 would depend on where they went. If in fact they do return to your facility within 30 days of the discharge date, then you have an entry tracking record as a re-entry, A1700 equals 2, and a decision to make as to whether the old care plan is still valid. In other words, will you need to file a SCSA because there has been an improvement or a decline in 2 areas? You have 14 days to make this decision, but the clock starts on the re-entry date. If your team decides that an SCSA is not warranted, then the OBRA schedule in effect when they left still applies as to when their next Medicare required assessment is due. A new SCSA can seem a lot for someone who was only gone for a few days and nothing unexpected changed at the hospital. But remember, this also applies if the resident is gone for a long time, up to a month. In the rare case the resident returns after over 30 days absence, then the entry tracking record and the OBRA admission are all new. But the bigger question is the Part A status, whether or not you will have to do a PPS series and a SNF Part A admission again. A lot will depend on how long the resident stayed with you before being taken to the ER in the first place. Again, your billing team is an essential part of your MDS team of advisors. What if you have filed an MDS transfer using A310F equals 11 and you never see this resident again? In other words, you thought a return was anticipated, but it never happened. In that case, the MDS record is complete and no further assessments are required. There is another video in this series about what to file if, in your clinical judgment, you believe from the start that a return is not likely. Look for a different video on transfers and discharges with return not anticipated, A0310F equals 10. Thank you for watching this video on MDS. As always, if you need further information, please go to www.cms.gov for the most recent REI manual. That's your best information. Another good source of information is your state coordinator. There's a list of your MDS coordinators in Appendix B of the REI manual. Thank you for your time.